Tonight on the Worldview Weekend Hour, Program 5 with Trevor Loudon. His new book has just been released today, White House Reds, and tonight we'll expose the worldview of Bernie Sanders. Is he really just a socialist, or is he a communist? Who gave him his start? Who is likely to be his running mate if he gets the Democratic nomination? What does this say about America? We've been warned, and Trevor Loudon has been giving the clarion call. The Worldview Weekend Hour begins right now.
This is WVW Broadcast Network News and Commentary with Brannon and Howse.
Good evening and welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour. Joining me in studio tonight is Trevor Loudon. We have been filming all day. This is program number 5. We have filmed 4 one-hour shows on his brand new book, White House Reds, that was released today. This is hour number 5. Tonight we'll do an expose of the worldview of Bernie Sanders. What is his worldview? Who put him into power? And what does it say about America that he is doing so well in the presidential election? Just before we went on the air tonight, we found out that Pete Buttigieg has dropped out of the race. So the race is narrowing, and we'll see where it goes. We're filming this on March 1st. We're live here on Sunday night for those watching live. And for the rest of you, it is a delayed program, and Super Tuesday's coming up. What does it say about America that Bernie Sanders is doing so well, as I was saying? That's one of the questions we'll ask Trevor Loudon tonight. His book, as I said, just came out today. We have the first interview with him, White House Reds, subtitled Communist, Socialist, and Security Risk, Running for U.S. President 2020. And I appreciate your stamina to put up with 5 hours of me shooting questions at you.
Look, it's very stimulating, and I'm here to spread the message as you are, so I'm happy.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're happy because, boy, we sure have put you through the paces today. We're not going to, plow ground that we've already plowed. They can do that when they watch program 1, 2, 3, and 4. But tonight, we certainly want to talk about Bernie Sanders. You write in your book, and by the way, I have a PDF of the book again. He sent me, so I marked it up. He did give me the copy today. It just came out today, but I'll be reading from a PDF copy that I've marked up. You write in your chapter on Bernie Sanders that he was born in 1941, has served as the junior United States Senator from Vermont since 2007. He attended Brooklyn College before graduating from the University of Chicago in 1964. As an independent, Sanders was elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont in 1981 and re-elected 3 times. He won election to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1990 and to the U.S. Senate in 2006. He is married to Jane O'Meara Sanders. After a year at Brooklyn College, Bernie Sanders spent 4 years at the University of Chicago, where he joined the Young People's Socialist League, youth wing of the Socialist Party USA. He also worked briefly for the communist-led United Parking House Workers Union. So, Trevor, can you believe this guy has made it this far? What does it say about the Democrat Party? What would JFK say about this?
Well, that's right. JFK opposed communism. Harry Truman opposed communism. And now you've got a bona fide communist running for the leadership of that party, which shows just how far it's drifted. And I'm sure there's a lot of Democrats or former Democrats watching tonight who are patriots, who love their country, and they have to understand that Bernie Sanders and the people around him have hijacked their party, and if he is allowed to lead it to the White House, he will destroy not only the Democratic Party, but the American economy, the American military, and American freedom. He will do exactly what every other communist has done around the world when they have taken power.
Now, in our past programs, we've talked about the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA,
Yep.
or the abbreviation of SDS, which is the Students for Democratic Society, correct?
Yep.
So we've got the DSA, we've got the SDS, we've got all these groups. He talks about them and documents them. So the point is this: whether you're watching this program live tonight or well into the future, a lot of this is history, and it is important history because it reveals where we're at, how we got here, where we're going, and we're revealing history about some of these groups that more Americans need to know about. Did Bernie Sanders get his start through the Democratic Socialists of America? And if so, who is this group? Who founded them and when?
Well, he did. He started locally in Vermont politics, basically with the Liberty Union Party, which was a subset of the Socialist Party USA.
Wait a minute. He got his start in politics in Vermont with a known socialist party.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Oh, it was militant.
But it had a nice name. What was that name?
Liberty Union.
How could you argue with Liberty Union, right?
They believed in no military spending. They believed in, also, it was a communist party, you know, it was blatant. But he got to start with that, but he would run with that and he'd get 4% of the vote, 6%, whatever. But then eventually started running as an independent. He won the mayoralty of Burlington, Vermont by 10 votes the first time. Eventually in 1990 he ran for the US Congress, and that's where DSA really started getting behind him. Now DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, was founded in 1984 by a man called Michael Harrington. It was former Communist Party members, former members of Students for a Democratic Society, the parent of the Weather Underground terrorist group, and old-line former members of the Socialist Party USA. Now, for a start, it was sort of moderately socialist, but today now it is communist. It shares members with the Communist Party USA. It has a formal alliance, the Left Inside Outside project, with the Communist Party USA. And its platform is actually more radical than the Communist Party USA. Now, these other people...
Wait a minute. The Democratic
Socialists of America...
their plan is more radical than the Communist Party USA?
Absolutely. They are more militant. They're more out there. They believe in the abolition of all prisons, all borders, and all prisons and all private business. They believe in the abolition of all private business, all borders, and all prisons. No jails, no borders, and no private business. That's about as left-wing as you can get.
So Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. He is a communist.
Absolutely, he's a communist.
What is the difference between a democratic socialist and a communist?
About 5 years.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it takes 5 years from a democratic socialist to implement communism. Look, Bernie Sanders will tell you that, no, I don't believe in communism. I believe in democratic socialism like in Sweden or Norway. Well, okay, Democratic Socialist America had its recent conference, and they invited a whole bunch of parties from around the world. They didn't invite any socialist parties from Europe, like Holland or Switzerland or Sweden. They invited the Communist Party of Germany. They invited the Communist Party of Brazil. They invited the Communist Party of Sudan. They invited all of these communist parties. Right now, Bernie Sanders people in Democratic Socialists of America are being trained by a group in New York called the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, which is the branch of a German group which is funded by the German taxpayer, but actually run by a German political party called Die Linke, the left in German, which used to be called the East German Communist Party.
Okay, wait a minute. I want to make sure our audience understands what you just said. You're saying that the people that were behind the Berlin Wall in Germany, East Germany, are doing what?
Training Democratic Socialists of America people now to elect Bernie Sanders. They're training them in schools, in courses in New York. They're bringing leaders from Democratic Socialists of America around the country and training them in New York, courtesy of the German taxpayer and organized by a communist party from Germany that used to be the East German Communist Party and is run by several known former Stasi secret police informants and is very friendly with Putin's Russia. That's the people training Bernie Sanders people.
So you're talking about Russia meddling in our elections. Are you telling me Russia is behind Bernie Sanders?
Absolutely. Look, Russia has been meddling in American elections since the 1940s. But always on behalf of the Democrats. Russia helped to elect Kennedy even because they didn't like Goldwater. They didn't like Nixon. Who was his opponent in 1960. Not saying Kennedy was their boy, But I'm just saying they've always worked in favor of Democrats because the communists got their influence through the labor unions, and the labor unions were mainly aligned to the Democrats. Mainly, not always, but mainly. So, yeah, look, Russia is interfering in the election now. The Chinese are absolutely interfering in American elections. They just helped to flip Virginia in last year's election cycle. They turned Virginia blue. They're now working on Florida and Georgia and North Carolina.
And we discussed that in program 1. We discussed in past programs with Tom Littleton on biblical values and social justice. It's called the AND campaign. Biblical values and social justice is their logo. So what they're saying is biblical values and socialism, as though those two go together.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. That's what you call the Hegelian dialectic process, merging opposites.
Why don't they just say biblical values and Satanism?
Yeah, doesn't work, does it?
So
that's based out of Georgia with Justin Gaboni, who's doing that, and who was an Obama delegate and for Hillary. He is a black lawyer out of Georgia. Also, Michael Ware, who is in the Obama White House in the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. He's part of that, and they're trying to flip the churches, and they've penetrated the evangelical churches, the Southern Baptist Convention. They're working with the Gospel Coalition guys to flip the churches in the South, but they particularly are targeting Georgia. Remember, Stacey Abrams, a neo-Marxist, almost became governor of Georgia. She lost by about 50,000 votes in 2018 from being the governor of Georgia. In Florida, we had Gillum.
Yeah, Andrew Gillum.
Gillum, neo-Marxist.
Yep.
And he lost by just 32,000 votes.
Yep.
So we're talking that close for Georgia and that close for Florida. And they're penetrating the South. They've already flipped Virginia. And you said they're working on
Florida, North Carolina, and Georgia, and Arizona. But the North Carolina and Georgia would be their biggest priorities, and Florida right now.
And as we discussed in past programs, as part of this series, they'll be going online soon at WVW-TV.com. One way they're doing that is try to legalize 40 million voters.
Yeah, they've cottoned on to the fact that there are millions of potential Democratic voters in the southern states, black, poor, white, Latino, that lean Democrat but don't normally vote. So instead of wasting all their money trying to get 1 or 2% of voters to flip to their way in the Midwest, they're spending a massive amount on voter registration drives amongst those communities in the South, which is why they almost won Florida, they almost won Georgia, they did win in Arizona with Kyrsten Sinema, the Communist Party supporter who is now a US Senator, and how they almost beat Ted Cruz in Texas. That was their trial runs. They are trying to mobilize 40 million new voters this election cycle against Trump. So we cannot take this election for granted in any way, shape, or form.
So if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, you think he will be, right?
I think it's more than likely. I would give him a 60% chance.
So you think it's between Biden and Sanders now?
I think that's what it's shaping out as, yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the worldview of Sanders. In 1980, he endorsed a presidential candidate. Who did he endorse?
He endorsed a guy called Andrew Pulley, who was the candidate of the Socialist Workers' Party, which was an openly communist, pro-Cuban political party, a Trotskyist political party. And Bernie Sanders openly was an elector for their candidate. But if you go back, to his youth, he went to Israel as a very young man and he worked on a commune there. But it wasn't just a commune, it was a pro-Soviet communist commune. It was known as a pro-Soviet commune. They used to fly the Soviet flag over the place, and their leader was arrested and jailed for spying for the Soviet Union. So this is right back when Bernie was in his 20s. So he worked with the communists in Vermont. Then he got in with Democratic Socialists of America. They helped to get him elected to Congress several times. As soon as he got to Congress, he set up the Congressional Progressive Caucus, working with Democratic Socialists of America. He got all the far left congressmen together to form a caucus. Started off with 6 of them. Maxine Waters was one of them. Mm-hmm. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I can believe it.
Yeah, so she was a crazy leftist. She was a Communist Party supporter. So he got the leftists together. Now that Congressional Progressive Caucus is now something like 96 members strong. It is nearly a half of the Democratic Party in Congress. And it's full of communists, Marxists, Maoists, whatever. They are the driving force. This is what Ocasio-Cortez is a member of. This is what Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib are all involved in this. And he started it. So then he got elected to the US Senate in 2006, which a campaign was completely run by Democratic Socialists of America. They supported him, they fundraised for him, they made him a US Senator, 100%. And he has been working with them, going to their conferences, supporting their causes. I've got numerous pictures of him at DSA conferences. And people, he'll say, well, they're just democratic socialists. No, they are not. It is a communist organization, more left-wing than the Communist Party USA. They believe in the elimination of all private business.
In my book, Marxianity, and in my documentary, Siege, which came out in December 2019, 8.5 hours, we deal with the history of the collapse of the Berlin Wall, how this was a fake collapse to throw us off. They were in bad shape economically, and by faking the collapse, which, by the way, a former KGB agent, Galusin, said this was going to happen. When he left, he wrote a book saying this is how they'll do it, and everything he predicted came true years later. And so I deal with that in the documentary Siege. He is heavily featured in our documentary Siege on many issues, and you can watch 1 hour for free at siegethemovie.com. But in this documentary, we discuss what it is that these communists have done and how they have come about to put together their plan to take over America, to siege America, which includes a red-green axis.
Yeah.
And what we're now finding is that many of these folks that are going under names like the Democratic Socialists of America are outright communist, but they're not just communists. They're now working openly with Iran and Islamic jihad organizations.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the red-green axis.
Yeah, we are. We're talking about, there are many, Democratic Socialists of America has many radical Muslim members in it. Rashida Tlaib, who is a far left congresswoman from Michigan. She is a member of Democratic Socialists of America.
So that's your red-green axis.
Yeah.
She's the one that was wearing the Palestinian flag the night she won her election.
That's right. Linda Sarsour, one of the most radical Muslims in the country, is also a member of Democratic Socialists
Your
of
red-green
America.
axis.
They are working in tandem. Why? Because they both hate America. America is the number one enemy of global Islam. It's the number one enemy of global communism. Let's take down America, and then we'll settle things after, all right? We'll divide up the world amongst ourselves after. We got to unite now to take down America. That's their philosophy.
So where is Bernie on this red-green axis? We know he's on the red part, but where is he working, as we've seen some of the rest of them working with the green side?
Yeah, well, like Elizabeth Warren is heavily involved with the Muslims. Amy Klobuchar is as well. Bernie is to a degree, because he lived in Vermont, which doesn't have many Muslims, he didn't interact with them as much as...
He had no reason to.
No, well, they weren't local. Like Elizabeth Warren worked heavily with the Muslims in Massachusetts, where they've got a big community. Amy Klobuchar worked heavily with them in Minnesota, which is also a big Muslim community. But Bernie Sanders, like he's got two advisors right now on Israel, right? One of them is a guy called Simon Malley, whose father was the founder of... Simon was the father. Simon Malley was the founder of the Egyptian Communist Party. And it was kicked out of France as being a Soviet spy. Well, his son is now Bernie Sanders' chief advisor on the Middle East, right? A communist from Egypt. The other one is Matt Duss, who is very, very pro-Palestine and very anti-Israel, and was supposed to be in several Democratic Socialists of America Bernie people went to Europe last year for meetings with the French Communist Party, German Communist Party, Austrian Communist Party, Italian Communist Party, and Matt Duss was supposed to be on that meeting, on that trip, but for some reason he cancelled. But that's the kind of people he hangs around with. So you've got Bernie is very militantly anti-Israel, He says that
And yet he's Jewish by heritage.
well, he's Jewish by heritage, but
Doesn't mean anything more. Look at Karl
because
Marx.
his communism means more to them than his Judaism.
As did Karl
means.
Marx.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Karl Marx was a,
Self-hating Jew.
Yeah, he wouldn't have done a lot of good for Israel,
No.
I'll tell you.
So we're really living in a post-communist America. In the documentary Siege, I said, hey, we're living in a post-communist America. And what I mean by that is the communists of the 30s and 40s would have never dreamed they could accomplish in America what they have. Never dreamed it, could they?
No, because what's been done in America has largely been done through the culture. You know, they tried the economic road, you know, you get the unions, you strike, you do all this kind of stuff. Well, it didn't work well in America because American free enterprise is so productive and people can make money here without having to get into the class struggle.
In other words, you can go from being a pauper to a prince in one lifetime.
Absolutely, or a prince to a pauper too. But, so what happened, they went into the culture, they went into Hollywood, they went into education, they went into religion, they went into the media. So although we so-called defeated communism with the Soviet Union, though really it was more a strategic retreat than a real defeat, they won the culture war. So now you've got all these young Bernie bros out there who think socialism is all the freedom we have today, all the prosperity we have today, plus free stuff. That's what they think it is. They think it's a Che Guevara t-shirt and lots of free stuff. And that's the influence of Gramsci, the Frankfurt
Italian
School.
communist Antonio
Italian
Gramsci.
Democratic Socialists of America is a Gramsci organization.
And by the way, Antonio Gramsci, for those who don't know, told Mussolini, you're going about it all the wrong way, change their values, change their worldview, you'll have a lasting revolution, don't do it at the end of a gun. Mussolini didn't like that, threw him in jail. He wrote his prison letters. His prison letters, I think, were actually translated into English in America here by Buttigieg's father.
Yeah, and this is so ironic. Buttigieg, who just dropped out of the race.
Today.
He was the moderate, you know, he's the real, oh yeah, I'm so moderate. He actually won an essay competition as a teenager, a national essay competition on his hero of moral courage. And that hero was Bernie Sanders. He admired him for his socialism. Buttigieg's father was one of the leading communist scholars in the world. Buttigieg worked with Democratic Socialists of America in South Bend, Indiana, supported their strikes, supported their organizations, was very, very close to them. He is just as much of a communist as Bernie, but he was going for the Joe Biden vote, not the left-wing vote. Because he thought if you get the Joe Biden vote, you get the moderate Democrats, the left has to follow. But if you just go for the left, the moderates might flip to the Republicans or stay home.
But Gramsci came in here and Buttigieg came in here because of Buttigieg's father translating some of Gramsci's work.
Yeah.
And so Gramsci, after he's thrown in prison, writes the prison letters. This Italian communist, his idea of going after the culture and changing the culture and going after education and media and changing their values, that was picked up by the guys at the Frankfurt School who came to America here around 1933 from Germany, and we're off to the races with cultural Marxism that we've been writing about and speaking about for years. We did our first hour on the Frankfurt School and cultural Marxism in November 1997 at our Worldview Weekend in Minneapolis, St. Paul, November 97. And now finally, cultural Marxism has reached into the vocabulary of more and more Americans than we've ever seen. So it's taken way too long, folks. We've got to get up to speed a lot faster. We can't wait for this many years for folks to get up to speed as to who these people are and the players. But there's Antonio Gramsci saying change their worldview, change their values, don't do it at the end of a gun. And you're saying because they followed that model here in America, that's why they've won the culture war, education, media, Hollywood, the power centers, and that's why we're now living in a post-communist America. The communists of the 30s and 40s would have never dreamed the American people would accept transgender operations for 5-year-olds, transgenders in the military. They would have never dreamed we'd go this far.
Yeah, you know, the Me Too movement is culturally Marxist. The transgender movement is cultural Marxism. Political correctness is cultural Marxism. Critical race theory, white privilege, all of this is cultural Marxism. We are, for people to say there's no communism in America is like a fish telling you there's no water in the sea. We are swimming in cultural Marxism. It's all around us. Every time we see an ad on TV where the husband of the family is looking like a doofus and the wife is just so clever and the kids are just so brilliant and they show the husband what to do, that's cultural Marxism. that is destroying the family as we know it. You know, denigrating the male. You know, they attack what they call a patriarchy, what we used to call a nuclear family. You know, so we're seeing it everything from Black Lives Matter to the Women's March on Washington, to the Bernie Sanders movement, to the global anti-global warming movement, to welcoming refugees and illegal immigrants from overseas. All of that is cultural Marxism.
And you know who's
and
warning about this?
All of it's destroying America.
In the early 70s, John Wayne was warning about this.
Exactly.
John Wayne was warning about the destruction of our patriarchal society. He was warning about cultural Marxism. He was warning by name of Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School, who coined the phrase "make love, not war." And that audio and video of John Wayne warning about this in the early 70s or mid 70s is in our documentary that came out this fall, Siege, at siegethemovie.com. Which is why they're trying to take down his statue and destroy him and ridicule him and character assassinate him, the strong patriot anti-communist
Absolutely.
John Wayne, who figured this out long ago, was warning people, and the American people didn't listen. So this is how they got as far as they did. Let's go back to Sanders real quick, and more of his worldview. You write in your excellent book, White House Reds, which you can order, by the way, at trevorloudon.com. Trevor is Trevor, Loudon, Loudn, trevorloudon.com. If you order it there, you're going to sign it and send them a copy.
Yep.
They get it on Amazon, but if they
get it on
order at
Amazon.
trevorloudon.com, you'll autograph it for them.
Yeah, I will, and I'll send it back to you.
All right, so on page 151, you write about Sanders. Civil war raged in Nicaragua through Sanders' entire mayoral tenure. The pro-Soviet Sandinista government was fighting a bitter guerrilla war against U.S.-backed Contra-Freedom fighters. Bernie Sanders squarely backed the Marxist Sandinistas. He boasted of it in his 1997 biography, Outsider in the House. He wrote, quote, "Many Burlingtons, including myself, supported the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. President Reagan did not. We disagreed with him. We expressed our displeasure. Somewhere in the Reagan archives, or wherever these things are kept, is a letter from the mayor of Burlington on this subject. There are also official proclamations from the Burlington Board of Aldermen made after long and emotional public hearings. Stop the war against the people of Nicaragua. Use our tax dollars to feed the hungry and house the homeless. Stop killing the innocent people of Nicaragua." This is what they were declaring. This was an issue, writes Bernie Sanders, that many of us in the progressive movement felt very strongly about. Not only was the war against Nicaragua illegal and immoral, it was an outrageous waste of our taxpayer money. As a mayor, I wanted more federal funds for affordable housing and economic development. I did not want to see taxpayer dollars going to the CIA for an appalling war, end quote. That's exactly the same thing, as we discussed in a previous program, that Martin Luther King Jr. was saying when we were trying to defeat the communists in Vietnam, bring them home and spend the money on housing. This is the same thing that Tulsi Gabbard has said as well.
Yep, it's the same
They
argument.
use that same argument.
Same argument used to justify Obamacare. All these social programs are not to help people. They're to take money away from the military budget, so the military is gutted, so Russia and China can do what it likes.
I want to make sure people understand what you just said. It's not because these people care about the poor. They use the social programs to steal the money from the military so we don't fight the communists, so the communists win and we lose.
Yes, exactly right. And Bernie Sanders was right in that. He didn't just write letters. He went to Managua. In Nicaragua, he participated in anti-American rallies down there. He also went to Cuba on more than one occasion. He went to the Soviet Union.
He has honeymoon there,
and
right?
his honeymoon there. Who does that in 1986? You know, he hung a Soviet flag up in his office in Burlington.
Say that again?
He hung a Soviet flag up in his office, mayoral office in Burlington.
How is it, if we had an FBI and a Congress doing his job, this man would be in prison. Would he not?
Yeah, the FBI started investigating him the day he got into office. The day the FBI were in there investigating
Think
him.
they still investigate him?
Oh, well, they probably don't now because he's too powerful now. But see, the thing is, once you're in Congress, the FBI doesn't investigate you any longer. That's the thing Americans have to understand. There's no background checks in Congress, none for senators, none for congressmen. You can be a communist serving on the Homeland Security Committee, like Benny Thompson, who's the head of it, or a communist serving on the Environment Committee, like Raul Gahalva, who is the head of that. Or you can be or a Marxist heading the Judiciary Committee, which oversees the FBI and the Justice Department, like Jerry Nadler, who is a Marxist, and there will be no investigation by the FBI whatsoever. There'll be no background checks, no security checks, no nothing. You think maybe the Russians know about this, or the North Koreans, or the Iranians, or the Cubans?
So what
you
you're
think
saying
they
is
know
instead of
that your congressmen are easily manipulated?
So instead of spending all the money on wars that they may or may not win, they can spend millions getting elected officials across the country that do their bidding.
Yeah, that's why you had a nuclear deal with Iran, for instance, because so many of your senators were taking money from Iran.
Including Biden.
Including Biden. He was one of the very worst.
You documented in this book.
Yep. He has worked in the interests of Moscow and Iran his whole life. And he was also involved, as we said before, in the Council for a Livable World, set up by the Soviets to gut the US military. And Bernie Sanders is also a major friend of the Council for a Livable World. He has said he is going to gut the military if he gets in.
You want to know what Sanders might do as president? Listen to what Trevor Loudon writes in his book. Mayor Sanders did way more to support his Marxist-Leninist heroes than write letters and complain. In 1985, Sanders traveled to New York City to meet with Nicaragua's pro-Soviet leader Daniel Ortega, shortly after his regime had imposed, quote, a state of emergency, end quote, that included mass arrests of regime critics, that'd be freedom, people for wanting freedom, anti-communist people,
yeah,
and closing down of opposition newspapers. So no freedom of speech, right? Sanders later said that the Sandinistas' crackdown, quote, makes sense to me, end quote. Under a Bernie Sanders presidency, do you think he'll be for freedom of speech, freedom of religion?
Absolutely not. And see, this is the thing Americans have to understand. They say, well, if Bernie gets in 4 years, we won't like him, so we'll elect somebody else. Look, people, there's an old saying, you can vote your way into socialism, but you have to shoot your way out. If he gets power, he will come after his enemies. He will shut down the opposition. The Silicon Valley will help him to deplatform us in every way we can. He'll set the IRS on his enemies. He'll close down churches he doesn't like. All of these things. He will gut his enemies so we can never come back. And he will also legalize 22 million illegal immigrants who will then vote loyally Democrat for the rest of their lives, and we can never win.
And where do we go after that?
We've got nowhere to go. We either buckle down or we try and rebel.
People say, well, we'll run to New Zealand where you're from.
No, we can't, because I'll tell you what, if America goes down, the Chinese have us in a heartbeat. They already have half got us now.
So this is the election of America's history. I mean, I guess that every election they say that, but this one is.
This actually is.
This one is.
Because you're going to have two things. Look, Donald Trump Jr. said on Fox and Friends in May, he said, the 2020 election will be communism versus freedom. Now that should have been headlines in every newspaper across the country. It got very little play, but it was absolutely true. If Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden win, you're going into communism. And I'm not talking like Sean Hannity says it's going to be like France or Germany or Sweden. I'm talking Venezuela. I'm talking that's what will happen, because the economy will crash like you have never seen before.
Where is Bernie Sanders and his little friend Tulsi Gabbard on Venezuela? Where are they on that?
Tulsi Gabbard completely supports Venezuela.
Who's run by a communist now.
Yeah. DSA completely supports Venezuela. Bernie isn't quite so open about it, but he says America should not try and get rid of the communists there. But DSA is openly, which supports Bernie all the way, is openly supportive of Maduro, openly supportive of the communists in Cuba, and openly supportive of the Palestinians in Palestine, all communist forces.
The whole red-green axis.
Yep.
So Lenin in 1924, he died in 24, right?
Yes.
And before he died, he said that what they would do is the communists would take Eastern Europe, then they'd take Asia, then they'd surround the United States of America, and America would collapse from within. That they would fall over into their hand like overripe fruit. Nikita Khrushchev said this same thing years later, and that's what's happened. We now see that Bernie Sanders is pushing for the communists down in South America all over the place. Daniel Ortega and his party, they're for Venezuela. I mean, they are surrounding us and collapsing us from within, just as they said they were going to do.
Yeah. And I'll tell you one thing that people need to understand. Mexico has a communist president now. Obrador is a communist. right? He's a pro-Cuban communist, worked with the Sao Paulo Forum, the big communist group that basically brought the Venezuelans to power and all these other communist groups in Latin America. What they are working with American Communist Liberation Road, or formerly called Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the people that flipped Virginia. Liberation Road is working with the Mexican communists. And the word I hear is, after about 2 years, when they have their midterm elections in Mexico, they're going to go full-on socialist. And when the Venezuelans went full-on socialist, a third of the population deserted the country. Well, Mexico's got 130 million people. When they go full-on socialist, where are their refugees going to go? They say, the communists openly state, Mexico will be a major part of the American Revolution, meaning the United States Revolution.
My guest is Trevor Loudon, author of the book that just came out today, White House Reds. You can order it at trevorloudon.com and they'll sign it. It came out today. We're getting the first interview. This is the 5th 1-hour shows. We've done 5 1-hour shows. Let me just ask you this. I know it sounds like a self-serving question, but how many broadcast outlets are interviewing you, much less for 5 hours on this topic?
Well, a few are lined up, but not to anywhere near the degree, not to anywhere near the depth and reach of this outlet. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
So how important is it to maintain outlets like this?
Look, it's absolutely critical. You know, you look at Fox News, it's sort of partly on our side, but it's got Marxists commentators like Donna Brazil and others on there. It's semi-conservative at best. For people to actually hear the truth, you're one of the very few outlets out there who actually says it like it is. And when it comes to the church stuff, the infiltration of the churches, you're really the only major outlet that is saying this kind of stuff. So it's absolutely critical that your voice is preserved.
And that's, of course, done by folks like you. Without you, we're gone. We're done. And when it comes to the church, you know, as I said, we did our first hour on the Frankfurt School in Cultural Marxism in November '97. So we've been writing and speaking on this thing for so many decades. And you know how hated I am by major evangelicals in America because of naming names like Rick Warren and Bill Hybels and all of these guys, and yet everything we have told them that was going to happen, it has happened and then some.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, some people don't like you because you're calling them out for what they do, and other people are a bit upset because they should be doing it too, and you're embarrassing them because they don't call it out. They want to just go along and let it all flow, you know. So, yeah, look, when you say tough truths to people, not everybody can handle it. And obviously the people you're calling out don't like it very much. But this is my view. To tell the truth about these issues and to call people out by name is a very loving thing to do. Because by pointing out people's error, it gives them a chance to come to terms with themselves and look inwards and maybe wake up.
And we're not saying we're perfect. No, my wife's sitting over here producing this show. She knows I'm not perfect. Right. Yeah. But we're not promoting communism and running around promoting the destruction of America and let's steal people's freedom of religion and let's steal their money and redistribute it. I mean, this is pretty black and white stuff. Mm-hmm. This isn't calling for everybody to be as pure as the wind-driven snow. This is simply just saying these things are wrong. It's clearly wrong. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know it's wrong. And there are Democrats in the past, like JFK, that wouldn't have stood for this stuff.
No, they absolutely wouldn't. But see, another thing we've got to talk about with Bernie is he's very much on board with the Green New Deal, right?
Right.
He's promoting it. So
which is really Marxism masquerading as environmentalism.
It is. Look, Stalin would have been embarrassed by it. It would have been gone too far for him. The Green New Deal calls on the total abandonment of all fossil fuels by 2030. That's 10 years away, folks. So all internal combustion engines, your jet engines, all the natural gas and oil that we use, all gone. So what do you think that's going to do to the US economy? By the way, and all workers will have to join a union. That's all part of it. There'll be a massive reduction in military spending. Well, it'll have to be because there'll be no tax revenue coming in because all business will be broke. That will put us back in the Stone Age with no military. What do you think the Russians and the Chinese are going to do then? What do you think? They're going to sit back while we re-elect a conservative who rebuilds the US economy over the next 20 years. They're going to wait. They're going to move, which is exactly what the plan is.
And see, what you're talking about is something Jeff Nyquist, who endorsed your book, who's a good friend of ours, and others are saying, is these people have long-term plans of invading the lower 48.
Yeah.
But when you talk like that, most Americans say that's crazy talk. But they have plans of invading the lower 48, right?
Yeah. That's what that... Look, Lunev and several other defectors have pointed out, all of Russian and Chinese foreign policy and military policy is designed to destroy the United States so the United States can be occupied by China.
Because they got 1.5 billion people over there and they're running out of room.
They're running out of room, and we got all this open space and all this infrastructure. The only thing standing in the way is us. Well, if it's between them and us, who do you think they're going to choose? Do you think they're going to have any moral qualms about taking us out if they have to, or enslaving whoever's left to work their farms or whatever they need to do?
And what you're saying is
they have active plans to do this stuff, and the Green New Deal
That's right.
will make it inevitable because it will destroy the U.S. military
and our economy.
Yeah,
And make us ripe for the picking.
yeah. So what are we gonna fight with? You know, we're going to fight with. What are we going to use for steel for our guns to fight them? Because most of our steel comes from China. If American industry is gutted, how do we defend ourselves, let alone our allies like Israel? So we got a communist government on our doorstep in Mexico. Most of Latin America is communist. Canada is run by a socialist who wouldn't lift a finger to help America. Most of Asia is now in the Russian and Chinese camp. Most of Africa is in the Russian and Chinese camp, and Europe is pretty much neutralized and wouldn't lift a finger to help America.
And being invaded by Islamists, and now
Well, yeah.
Erdogan has opened up the borders and flooded
Yeah.
them in there.
Yeah.
That's in the news today.
Yeah, well, that's red-green axis again, you know. The original plan was, I'm told, Putin was going to invade the Ukraine, and he's going to drive 5 million Ukrainians into Europe and create chaos. But the Ukrainians were too darn tough, and they wouldn't buckle because they have genuinely broken away from Russia. So he started the trouble in Syria instead and drove several million Syrians and Middle Easterns into Europe to create chaos, to overtax the economy, to dispirit the people, to drive the crime through the roof, you know, wreck the public health system, all this kind of stuff. This is deliberate spreading of anarchy and chaos, all orchestrated out of Moscow as it has been since the Bolshevik Revolution. It never stopped, even under Yeltsin. It never stopped under Gorbachev. It has not stopped under any Russian leader, because it's not the Russian leaders who are in control, it is the KGB who's in control, and they always have been, and until we get rid of them entirely, they always will be.
And it's called the FSB today.
FSB.
You write in your book today, White House Reds, according to White House correspondent Hunter Walker, in July 1985, Bernie Sanders traveled to Nicaragua, where he attended an event that one Wire reporter dubbed an anti-U.S. rally. Goes on to talk about, on stage, Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega accused the U.S. government of state terrorism for supporting the rebels, who were, again, fighting against communism, who were seeking to overthrow him. The Sandinistas and the CIA-backed Contras would fight into the next decade with allegiances of human rights abuses, with allegations of human rights abuses on both sides. At the 1985 rally Sanders attended, Ortega vowed the Sandinistas would defend the revolution with guns in hand. Sanders was being hosted by the Sandinistas as part of a delegation of American solidarity groups. He told reporters their decision to show support for the Nicaraguan government was patriotic. Man. We quote, "We want to show support for a small country trying to be independent, and we want to tell the truth to the American people when we return," end quote, Sanders said. Sanders met with President Ortega. He later called the trip, quote, "profoundly emotional," end quote. You write, Mayor Sanders also visited Cuba in 1989 on a trip organized by the New York-based Center for Cuban Studies, once described by former communist Ronald Radash as, quote, "the semi-official propaganda agency for Castro in the United States," end quote. When he returned to Burlington, Sanders explicitly reported that Cuba, quote, "has solved some very important problems," end quote, like hunger and homelessness. Cuba today not only has free health care, but very high quality health care, end quote. And then you go on to state that in Bernie Sanders' world, Cubans actually like living in a communist dictatorship. Bernie Sanders said, quote, "The people we met had an almost religious affection for Fidel Castro. The revolution there is far deep and more profound than I understood it to be. It is really a revolution in terms of values," end quote. You write, Sanders later recalls, quote, "being very excited when Fidel Castro made a revolution in Cuba. It just seemed right and appropriate. The poor people were rising up against a lot of ugly rich people," end quote. Then you state in May of 98 and the following day, they left this, what is that, Yaroslavl near Moscow.
Yaroslavl was a town near Moscow. Yeah.
Near Moscow, in the former Soviet Union, that he and his wife to have their honeymoon. The newlyweds were part of an official delegation from Burlington, and it goes on from there. Sanders hung a Soviet flag in his mayoral office in Burlington to mark the trip. You then state in 1988, iconic journalist I.F. Stone once paid Soviet agent. He was once paid agent.
He was a Soviet spy. A paid Soviet spy, yes, I.F. Stone, one of the leading journalists in this country.
And he wrote a letter in support of Bernie Sanders' congressional run.
Yeah, he endorsed Bernie Sanders' first congressional run and wrote a letter. This is a Soviet spy endorsing Bernie Sanders.
And there it is right here in the book if you want to see it, American Reds. Man. And then, of course, we have Maxine Waters. Maxine Waters, of course, is the one talking about impeaching Trump within days of him being elected,
Yep.
right?
Look, she has worked with the communists her entire political career, and she was a founder with Bernie Sanders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
Tell me about young Democratic Socialist James Madison University and what they were up to.
Well, they admit that the Congressional Progressive Caucus that Bernie founded was set up by Democratic Socialists of America to influence the Democratic Party. So they admit that they worked with a communist group worked with Bernie Sanders to set up this caucus in the U.S. Congress, which is now the most powerful caucus in the Congress, the most left-wing and most powerful.
So they try to act like they're not a political organization or tied to the DNC, but they are.
Oh, look, they admit they influence Democrat policy. Obamacare came out of Democratic Socialists of America. The immigration amnesty push came out of Democratic Socialists of America. The Green New Deal came directly out of Democratic Socialists of America with some help from the Communist Party USA. See, there they are, when they elected him to the US Senate, he writes a thank you note to DSA, which they put on the cover of their magazine.
And this guy has a good chance of being the DNC candidate.
Yeah, he has a good chance of being the Democrat candidate, and he has a good chance of winning. We've got to understand that.
Tell me the difference between big C communist and little c communist.
Well, big C communist is open. We say we are communists. We believe in a communist America. But even then, their party will be, only a few of their members will be open. Most of them will be secret. Small c communism is, we're part of the communist movement. We work for communist goals, but we don't necessarily call ourselves communists. We might call ourselves progressives or democratic socialists, but we work with the Communist Party USA and are completely in accordance with their goals. See, Democratic Socialists of America can work with the Democratic Party or inside a church very easily because we're just socialist, we're democratic, but they have exactly the same policy positions as the Communist Party. So the Communist Party couldn't do that because people, communist, they back off it. But you have the same policies promoted by Democratic Socialists and it's all right. It's just semantics. It's just Democratic Socialism is just a euphemism for communism. That's all it is.
Tell me about John Case and who is John Case?
John Case was the New England organizer for the Communist Party USA, and he worked a lot with Bernie Sanders when he was looking after the Communist Party in Vermont and that. And he talks about how Bernie is he wrote a little article saying Bernie is the most sophisticated political operator. He was able to neutralize anti-communist attacks from Republicans, and he talked about his future run as a presidential candidate. This was written 15 years ago.
By the Communist Party district organizer in New England.
Yes, saying that Bernie was a man for the future and how clever he was.
Tell me about Garcia, Chai Garcia.
Chuy Garcia, well, he ran for the mayoralty of Chicago in 2015 against Rahm Emanuel. Chuy Garcia has worked with the Communist Party now for 40 years. He was the Communist Party candidate, and he got 45% of the vote, I believe. And Bernie Sanders came and endorsed him and held a big fundraising rally for him. And Bernie got photographed with the Scott Marshall of the Communist Party, and he endorsed Chuy, who's a complete communist. And then Chuy didn't run that race, but then he got elected to Congress in the last election cycle, and straight away he joined Bernie Sanders' Congressional Progressive Caucus.
What is Our Revolution? It's called Our Revolution.
Yeah.
What is that?
See, the Bernie Sanders movement, there's about 60,000 Democratic Socialists of America members in the country. They've got chapters in every state.
60,000.
60,000, right? Now, the Communist Party had about 100,000 at its peak. So these have got 60,000. But they've also got a subsidiary organisation called Our Revolution set up, and it's basically just a front for DSA. And it's got 600 branches around the country and over 200,000 members. So DSA and Our Revolution are the backbone. This is the Sanders movement. There would be no Sanders movement without these two organisations.
So without DSA and Our Revolution, those are the two?
There would be no Sanders movement, none. But so Our Revolution, not all the people in it are communists. Most are, but not all. So it's just a wider front for Democratic Socialists of America, and they are basically the backbone of Sanders' campaign. Well, you name Our Revolution. What does that mean? You know, they're not talking about a personal salvation here or a personal revolution. They're talking about Marxist revolution.
And they're all going to go to work for Sanders. And you right here, Our Revolution won over 70 cases in races in 2018 general election cycle, including electing DSA Congresswoman Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib, and far leftist Ilhan Omar, and then, of course, Deb Haaland to the U.S. House Representatives. So
yeah.
These people, our audience obviously knows who Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib is, and Ilhan Omar. And if it wasn't for the DSA and Our Revolution, these people would have never been elected.
No, absolutely not. They would have never gotten near it. They would have never got through the primary. But
do these people get into a Bernie cabinet who wins?
Yeah, I believe so. Some of them would, yeah. Absolutely. Look, you know, Barack Obama was also very close to DSA, and he put, you know, people into his cabinet from DSA, like Ron Bloom, his car czar, was a DSA member, for instance. But Bernie will, you know, DSA and Our Revolution have got about 70 people running for Congress this cycle. 70 more Ocasio-Cortezes. 70 more Rashida Tlaibs are running. Now, most of them won't get elected, but you can guarantee 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 will. Can you imagine 4 or 6 or 8 more of these people in Congress? But see, this is the point I make. We look at Ocasio-Cortez, who's crazy socialist, but Nancy Pelosi's is just as Marxist as she is, but she just doesn't show it as much. Joe Biden is just as bad as Bernie Sanders. He is just more discreet about it, right? So, as I say in my movie, 2016 movie, Enemies Within, about 100 members of your House right now and 25 members of the US Senate, that's a quarter of each body, half of the Democrats, couldn't pass a background check to drive a school bus. They wouldn't be allowed to sell you stamps at the post office. But they are running the Homeland Security Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Intelligence Committee, the Education Committee, the Environment Committee, the Judiciary Committee. They're running all these committees, and they're all anti-American Marxists.
We're running out of time. Tell me about La Raza. Is La Raza working with Bernie Sanders in any way?
Yeah, well, Bernie's done quite well in Latinos, with the Latinos.
And La Raza means the race.
The race. It's a militant.
They want to kick Americans, Europeans out of California, Arizona, and take over.
Well, the Mecha, which is aligned with La Raza, wants to return all the southwestern states to Mexico. Right? Mm-hmm. Basically, they believe that they were stolen from Mexico. It's a communist organization. La Raza is in that orbit, and several Latino communist organizations are organizing Latino voters for Bernie Sanders. So I think what the Republicans are going to do well in the Midwest this election, in Minnesota and Ohio and places like that. The big danger is the southern states with high black and Latino populations where the left are putting all their money. So that's Bernie Sanders people with European communists.
European communists, yeah.
You
We
know?
started out talking about that.
Yeah, so
Which was the East European Berlin Wall communists.
yeah, they are working with Die Linke, which is the former East German Communist
And of course,
Party.
you've got the vice president of the Communist Party of Spain, the vice president of the Italian Party of Communist Refoundation.
Yeah.
I mean, communism is marching around the globe, is it not? I mean, they say there's
Absolutely.
only 6 communist nations in the world. That's a lie, right?
They don't even include California in that. But no, there's about, in my calculations, about 15 that are effectively communist, and about a quarter of the world, about a third of the world, is in the communist camp, in the communist orbit. So, yeah, it's a lot bigger movement than we're ever told.
And of course, Tulsi Gabbard is served on the Bernie Sanders Institute, the Sanders Institute.
Yeah, look, Tulsi Gabbard is completely part of the Sanders movement. She is a Marxist just like he is.
And so she would be a good VP candidate for him with her military background.
A
And being
military
a woman.
background, woman of colour. She'd be pretty good, and I think it'll either be her or Stacey Abrams will get the. If he gets that far, they'll be on the ticket with him.
60 seconds. Bernie Sanders wins. How does America look? How does this impact the average person listening tonight?
Well, the economy collapses pretty soon. He's already said he's got a whole bunch of executive orders to go to implement straight away. He'll go after the guns. He'll tighten control over education. They'll introduce the Equality Act, which will put LGBTQ rights above your religious liberties. They'll go after the conservative churches, and they will clamp down on their enemies real quick.
What happens to guys like you and me and others?
Well, we'll be persecuted. We'll be heavily persecuted and shut down and deplatformed. And if we still don't shut up, I think we'll eventually be put in jail.
And how many of these Marxists are becoming the district attorneys across the country?
Well, that's another thing. Democratic Socialist America has elected several DAs across the country. Pennsylvania, they elected a Marxist in San Francisco recently. And what these DAs are doing is refusing to enforce laws. Shoplifting is virtually legal now. They won't enforce shoplifting laws, street prostitution, vagrancy, street encampments. So the cities where these people are taken over are becoming cesspits. And the good people are moving out, and the tax base is moving with them. So they're going to tank these cities like Philadelphia, San Francisco. Well, San Francisco is already half tanked as it is. But they're doing this in Austin, Texas now. They're doing it, they almost won a race in Queens in New York with this. They've got a whole bunch of these people. Because if you're a Marxist, you believe people are not criminals because they're personally evil or irresponsible. They're criminals because they're oppressed by the capitalist system.
And this is exactly what Tim
therefore-
Keller says in my book, Marxianity.
Yeah.
This is exactly what he's saying in my book, Marxianity.
Absolutely. So therefore, you don't punish them for their crime, you change the system. You change the oppression.
You redistribute
and
the wealth.
They redistribute
And the crime will
wealth.
stop. That's what they say.
Which it doesn't.
No.
But it's never intended. But what it does is it creates this chaos and instability which leads to revolution.
My guest has been Trevor Loudon. His book, White House Reds. You can get an autographed copy at trevorloudon.com, trevorloudon.com. Now, folks, again, I ask you, if you appreciate the fact we're doing this broadcast, we filmed 4 one-hour shows part of this, 5 one-hour shows in one day, and we put these out there as we post-edit them. We spend $3,000 a month just in streaming and storage, $3,000 a month. We are listener-supported. Without you, this does not happen. In fact, if you will join our VIP club, where we archive all our TV shows, radio shows, audiobooks, ebooks, over 1,000 TV shows like this archived in our VIP club. If you will join at the 1-year, 2-year, or 3-year rate, I'm going to send you my book, Marxianity, this book, Marxianity, and my documentary, Sabotage, 6.5 hours or 6 hours, free. 6-hour documentary, Sabotage, and my book, Marxianity, free. If you join our VIP club, where we have over 1,000 TV shows like this archived, you can join at WVW-TV.com/subscription. WVW-TV.com/subscription. The other way you can support us is with a tax-deductible contribution at WVWFoundation.com. WVW-Foundation.com. Again, we are listener supported. It's vital we hear from you, or these kind of programs will not continue. We cannot afford to keep going if you don't support us. That's all there is to it. Trevor, thank you so much for writing this book. Even after the 2020 elections, this is an historical book that people should have.
Yeah,
I encourage them to buy it.
There's a lot of communist history in
There is a ton of history
This
here.
will be relevant for a very long time.
Yes, it will.
Some of these candidates have already dropped out, but now they're still there. They're still senators. They're still governors. They're still doing stuff.
Yep.
And so people need to... The book was written to basically expose how deep the communist penetration of the Democratic Party is. Of 23 candidates who started the race, 13 of them were Marxists. All of the leaders right now are Marxists, with the possible exception of Bloomberg. But he's horrible in other ways. But so that's what people need to understand. This is not the party of JFK or Harry Truman any longer.
Definitely not. All right, trevorloudon.com. Again, folks, if you appreciate it, we got to hear from you. We have got to boost some of our security, some things that have happened in the last few months, and some things that have come in to us and to our attention. We've got to boost some of our security and some security items that we won't talk about. So again, we've got a lot of expenses. We need your support. Please go right now, if you would, WVWFoundation.com and make a tax-deductible contribution. Again, thanks for joining us. Till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. Take care.